am here with Kim Storin, Chief Market Officer. That is her title. We love that. Love that. And Kim is going to talk to us about being a Chief Market Officer. And this is, again, part of our Empowered CMO series. Just really, really excited to highlight all of these amazing women that are empowered CMOs. So, Kim, welcome to Talking Sense.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. See you virtually. Soon we'll be in person, I hope.
Doesn't it feel like we've hung out so much though? Just because
it does. Yeah. I mean, the miracle of Zoom, right?
I've been to your house. You've been to my house.
We've had tequila together.
It's all good. It's all good. Well, I want to kind of kick it off because I'm really hoping folks learn what it takes to be a Chief Market Officer, what that means to you. You've done some gutsy moves with customer insights, so want to dig into that and just kind of get your take on some of the things that we discussed at the Empowered event and also some of the things that came out of the survey. So let's get into it. We talk about Chief Market Officer versus Chief Marketing Officer. Mm-hmm. And some people are all in, some people are watching, waiting, some people maybe are poo-pooing it out there. You're all in. You changed your title. You're all in. So why are you all in? Give us the backdrop.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, when we started this conversation in Napa 2 years ago, basically, I guess at this point, 18 months ago at this point, it really resonated with me. I had come from a non-traditional path to marketing. I'd been an ex-management consultant. I started my career in crisis PR and had really come through kind of a circular route to marketing and was focused mostly on transformation. So big brand transformation, mergers and acquisitions. I spent 15 years doing mergers and acquisitions, and here I was in marketing, and I felt like, my view was always starting with business strategy. And so this concept of Chief Market Officer really resonated with me because what I realized is that was what I was bringing to the table, right? I was bringing that deep customer insights. I was bringing even the broader market insights. I spent most of my time focusing on the industry and analysts and strategy and pulling together product and sales and marketing. And finally, there was a way to describe that didn't involve a term paper of what is strategy and how does it work. And it was like Chief Market Officer. It just, the light bulb went on and it clicked because that was what I'd been doing for the past 10 years in marketing.
So how would you describe a chief marketing versus a chief market officer?
Yeah, so I think it's a really important distinction. And in many ways, when it comes to the toolbox and how we execute, there are similarities. And so leveraging all of those tools that we have at our disposal. But I think what it is that it's really, it's taking a step back and being able to overlay this concept of business strategy and go-to-market strategy on top of the execution. And so when we get caught up in the day-to-day, what are we posting on social media? What event? How are we showing up at this event? It's just kind of become a laundry list of stuff. And how are we actually able to step back, bubble that up, be more strategic, and think about the value that we can have by asking the right questions. And so that's why I think when I think about Chief Market Officer, I think about curiosity, agility, calculated risk-taking, strategy. When I think of marketing, I get really caught up in the execution. So I think it's the framework versus how do we execute.
But a lot of people feel safe. And I bet there's a bunch of marketers and CMOs out there saying, right on, I want to do the strategy. I want to be able to do that. But the people around me don't feel safe in that. They feel safe in me showing up with MQLs and ebooks and more webinars.
And I think that's why it's not really about, does the chief market officer themselves embrace the concept of chief market officer?
Right.
It's the board and the CEO embrace it. And I feel really lucky in my position because my CEO had been at a conference with a couple of folks from Empowered CMO and had come back from that conference saying, this is what I need. I need a chief market officer. So he got it. We're working daily.
Double click on that. Why do you think that he felt he wanted a chief market versus marketing?
So he
just super enlightened, or was?
I mean, he is. Yeah. but really, it came down to creating and owning a category for him. And so, while that's not everything that's encompassed in a chief market officer, that is one element of the strategy that we can drive by being more market and insight focused. And so for him, he has, big visions for this company, big growth visions. And in order to get to where he wants to get, he knows that he has to create a category for his business. And the only way to do that is with somebody in this position that can help him understand the insights, start to shape the industry, and really take a more strategic look. So it was that one piece of what the chief market officer does that really resonated with him. And he viewed it, and as we all are, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
That element as like the what's in it for him, right, was like success and accelerated growth, and so really looked to me to be able to fill that gap for what he saw with the business to date. And so that really was a door opener in terms of how I could have a broader conversation with him around, yes, like we can create a category, but that takes, we have to do that, we have to understand the market, we have to understand our customers and our partners, we have to build a platform strategy overall. And so that little conversation, that one piece actually turned into a much larger and more strategic conversation. So having his backing was important.
So let's talk about when the rubber meets the road, because, if we had $1 for every CEO who says, I'm going to create a category, I want you to create a category. Yep. They're out there. We hear that all the time. So the rubber meets the road. You get hired for the chief market officer. You've done your best during the interview process to set the stage. What do you do first?
I mean, for me, it was about understanding the market. I was like, I've been in tech forever. I understand really complex technology like semiconductors and servers and how they all work together. But I was new to SaaS, right? So for me, I was also new to public safety. And again, I understood long sales cycles and complexity of like enterprise deals, but I didn't really know the government or 911 market. And so stepping in, like the first thing to do any of the work that the chief market officer is charged with doing, we have to understand the market. And so I spent, my first 2 weeks, interviewing customers. I spent my second 2 weeks interviewing customers that we wish we had. And then I, basically embarked on a pretty large scale research project, because while many industries have, analysts, I mean, I came from an industry where, my phone was filled with 200 analyst contacts I could call in a heartbeat, coming into an industry that had no analyst coverage, or very minimal, that basically you're starting from scratch. So we had to go invest in that market research early on in order to have any sense of where the market is, what people were challenged with, where they wanted to head, and how we could position our company to best meet those needs. So for me, just being new to that industry, it really gave me an opportunity to be extra curious and go do that work.
So I want to just double click on this, and here's why, because I think it was kind of a ballsy move, right? Do you mind sharing your ARR at the time and about how much the market research cost?
So we ended, well, I can't really say exact numbers. We're a, hyper growth. We just closed Series B company. And so for us, like, it was a significant investment out of our marketing budget to go deliver those research insights. But what also was really important is that we needed to be able to go communicate those insights back to the market themselves. So it wasn't just like, okay, Kim doesn't know the industry, like, let's get Kim smart, right? It was the industry actually doesn't know the industry, because there weren't analysts. There wasn't, there's not a lot of press coverage around what's happening from a transformation standpoint in the industry. So we were able to leverage those insights to go build really great, solid content to help educate our customers as well. So I was able to rationalize, not just from getting the organization smart and centered, but also let's get our customers smart and centered. What does the adoption curve look like for this industry that is so far behind digital transformation from any other industry out there? It really is the final frontier. And without understanding what's holding them back and the obstacles in front of them, like, how can we deliver product or support or capabilities or messaging that helps them get over that hurdle?
So how do you like to structure this kind of research? Was it survey-based, interview-based? Like, for someone who's saying, I feel like I probably need to help, have a mirror to shine and show people what the market is. What do you recommend?
So we had a couple of ways to do it. First of all, we started with just like straight up interviews of people we knew. And so that really set the baseline to understand. I interviewed 20 people one-on-one in the early days, plus folks that had been in the industry at the organization. So that helped us kind of set the framework for understanding, what does an early adopter look like? What does the laggard look like? What's, keeping these guys up at night? What's holding them back from change? And then we actually went and hired a third-party research company, because we knew that we weren't going to be able to do that. We had to do this blinded, especially because we wanted to get some baseline kind of quick and dirty brand awareness numbers as well. And so they did it through, and again, we had to be really clear about who we were qualifying, because in public safety, you've got a huge buying committee. You've got folks that are engaged, whether it's IT or within the the public safety organization. So we had to start with a really deep qualification exercise, and like throw out a lot of people who we would have thought would have been good survey respondents. But ultimately, if they didn't have a role in the decision, we didn't want to talk to them. It wasn't worth it. So they did a lot of phone screening, and then also did an online survey, as well as a full qualitative interview as well. So it was pretty detailed. And so that was really kind of the baseline work that we did. Secondarily, we also did a call out campaign to Ohio. And like in particular, because we're trying to understand, does every state look the same, or is there something that we're missing? And so we built a propensity to buy model based on calling 30 prospects in one state. And so that so those three things between, our original interviews, which were like the friendlies, the broad blinded survey, and then the targeted blinded call out, really gave us this opportunity to look at, the market, the insights, the propensity to buy, and really understand all those pieces so that we could build a stronger and more resonant messaging framework, that we could work with our product team to build a roadmap that matters. And how do we communicate that? And that we could work with our sales team to figure out what 3 routes to market are actually going to go after what targets. Where does marketing own that end to end? Where does the channel? Where does sales? But without having those 3 discrete pieces of research, we never would have been able to move as fast on messaging, product or just general go-to-market strategy.
So how did you, I guess, form your own opinions and then socialize this in a meaningful way?
Well, we socialized as we went on. So we tried to bring everyone into the process, because one of the things that I learned, early on in brand transformation is everybody has an opinion. Everybody thinks that they know the brand better than everyone else. And basically, if you don't bring them along from the beginning, so they're part of the process, they will just write you off at the end. So those like initial interviews with folks internally, and then sharing the data as each piece of this process was coming to light, was really what was enabling, you know, the ability to move fast, even though we moved slow to begin with. And what I found, like, I was really focused on, I want everyone in this organization to see a bit of themselves in the messaging, which is hard. But like, if you put that mindset like early on, and you start to really listen to them with the idea of like, every piece of input is valid. How do we make sure that this is coming through? That we were, I mean, even if it wasn't the exact words that they were using, like, could they see themselves in this? And so that was the litmus test as well of like, are we on the right path? And so the socialization was easier. But I'll be honest, right? We still struggle with some of it. And, you know, there are always folks, especially in an industry that's as unique as public safety, right? There are people who have been in this industry for 30 years, 40 years. And so their views might be different than someone who's coming in fresh. And so really like having some empathy and being able to understand where they're coming from, but also to be open to bringing them along on the journey. It's also an old school industry. So we've got like, and it is the final frontier of digital transformation. So if we stay where we think now, we're never going to move to the future.
Right. And you won't have a company.
Exactly.
It sounds like you have an evolved CEO, but you also have an evolved board member. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your board member. And I think he's got an interesting point of view on CMOs acting like CEOs.
Yes, he does. So Ray Lane, who is kind of an icon in Silicon Valley, you guys probably all know him from Oracle, and you know, he's on the board of HP, etc. He is on our board of directors, and he's been such a, I mean, obviously he's a maverick, an icon, but he also just really gets marketing. Now, you know, he also, like, when he's talking about like, you know, CEOs and marketing, you know, he's talking about Steve Jobs and Larry Ellison. Like, I mean, his level is a little different than mine, but he gets it. His statement. I hosted the CMO roundtable for Breakpoint Ventures at the end of last year, and he joined us to kind of kick off the roundtable and said to all of us, you know, there's no other role in the organization that should think like a CEO more than the CMO. And he really challenged us to think like the CEO, to put the business strategy first and to think about how we bring ideas to the table. So he's really always been kind of challenging me and has made it a very safe place to, you know, to bring ideas and maybe be wrong. And I think that openness to experimentation and the openness to strategic conversation has been a really big differentiator in terms of working with him and the board versus what I expect others might be feeling, because he is so focused on marketing as that business driver.
So one of the things I found interesting in the survey that we did for Empowered was I took the job description of a CEO and I boiled it down into a bunch of things. And then I asked all of the empowered CMOs what they spend their time on. And there was about 90% overlap between CEO duties and what our CMOs and empowered are doing. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was, hey, that's kind of interesting. But then there was another question on the survey about your and beyond, right? So, hey, we're doing this today. We're loving it. If we're doing a lot of CEO or acting like CEOs, is that a next step for us? And only 7% thought that was in the realm of possibility or something they wanted to do. So what do you make of that? I've been wondering if do we just think it's like so out there and not on the table? Or is it just doesn't seem interesting to a lot of CMOs?
I mean, I was thinking about this, and I mean, I think there's a couple things. I think there's a lot of industry, like it depends on the industry, right? Because I think if you go and you look at like a CPG industry, for example, where marketing, you think about brand marketing in the sense of CPG, like they own the P&L, right? So that path from marketing to, GM to CEO does not feel out of the realm in CPG, right? Because that is the P&L. I think in B2B and enterprise, it's a little bit more like we always have gravitated towards like, is it from a product or a sales perspective? And I think that's why it's so important that we have to start to pivot that value and the perception of the role of marketing, because the ING is what holds us back. And I think there might be some like internal mindset that we have as marketing leaders that we don't see a lot of people that have blazed the trail ahead of us, right? So if you can't see a role model, then it's hard to envision that path for yourself. And I think the more that we change that perception of what marketing is and what we do, that role model and that path becomes clearer. And when we see ourselves as, being about the market, about being a revenue driver and accelerator, about being a transformation-oriented role, I think that path becomes clearer. And I think ultimately B2B specifically is going to require a lot of education. And we're going to require, those 7% that raise their hand, say, yes, I want to be CEO.
We got to get behind them, man.
Right. Because if we can see the path, then I think you'll see, I think it's just, we don't see role models. And
I want to know who those 7% are so we can do a marketing campaign around them.
Exactly. So I think in B2B, we need to we need to help accelerate the perception of marketing from ING and execution to, more product, more revenue focused, more strategy focused, more aligned to the business. And then I think you'll start to see more than 7% raising their hand. But I think there just hasn't been that clear path.
We talked about your board being evolved, and not all boards are evolved, right? And so I firmly believe that education has to happen in the investment community in terms of the questions you ask a CMO and what you expect of a CMO. I can see as this survey unfolds that these CMOs are having to rage against the machine to move to account-based because, the sales leader, the CEO, the board is saying, just show me your MQL report.
Right. Well, and I think, it's interesting because I think it starts with us educating also, during the interview process too, because I interviewed with a CEO who basically said, how much pipeline are you going to generate in your first, month and 3 months? And I came back and I said, well, here's the 15 questions I have for you about the market, about the customer, about the sales cycle, about if you can answer these 15 questions, I'll come back to you with a concerted effort to give you more insight. And he basically was like, this job's not for you. And that's a self-selection too on our part, because we have to start to recognize these are not the CEOs or the boards that we want to work with, because at some point we can help. But if you're going to shut down and not be open to the conversation, then I feel like ultimately it's not a place where a chief market officer will thrive and be able to really drive business value. We should be seen as, the right hand of the CEO from a strategic and market insights perspective. And account-based marketing is a perfect example, right? If you're getting so caught up in the day-to-day, how do you make a pipeline report look better than it actually is versus how do I do really good marketing
and segmentation
that drives revenue?
Yeah.
Right? If you want a report, I'll get you a report. But if you want to actually see an incremental benefit to the business, let's have a strategic conversation. And I think we're just going to have to start to, to self-select out and say, these are not the CEOs who we want to work with. And I mean, I think it's the only way sometimes, because I think the education, we can do the education. It's hard. And if you don't have an open-minded CEO and board, you're going to feel like you're banging your head against the wall.
People love KPIs. They love to be able to have some semblance of measuring progress. How, as a chief market officer, do you say, this is what I'm going to measure progress against?
So, I mean, I think you have to bubble it up, right? And I think the pipeline metrics, like those are all pieces of what I'm delivering. But my ultimate goal is to drive leads and brand awareness and things that are going to drive the business forward and that are going to ultimately be partnering with sales, partnering with product to move the business forward. And so my OKRs are not focused on those individual, I'm going to drive this many leads in this amount of time. They are more focused on how are we moving the market forward. And underneath it, if you dig in, ways that, the tactics are there of how do we do that, but that's not the conversation that I'm leading with.
So what is an example of one of those? I mean, is it just the basic revenue metrics, win rates, growth, or are there certain market ones that you are providing?
So I think it depends on when you're looking at putting those metrics in place, right? If it's and what stage the company is in as well. So every quarter, for example, I am tracking metrics that are how do we measure and understand the market, right? And that varies quarter by quarter, depending on where we are with research and insights and how are we really looking at this across the board from a win-loss standpoint. So I always track those things, and it's more of a completion in a lot of ways, but it's the fact that it is it's not necessarily the metric itself. It's the fact that I'm tracking it at the dashboard level. That's important because it's a conversation starter. So I think it is hard to measure, especially, I mean, in an industry that doesn't have some of those typical, analyst coverage,
it's not like you can say I went
in a magic quadrant. Not going to happen.
We're leaders,
right?
You got your own quadrant.
But I think for folks that are looking at, the true category creation, it's there's a lot of metrics that you can put in place around, analyst coverage and where you show up in waves and quadrants. But I think there's even just a layer of simplicity that has to happen of every time I present to the board, I'm leading with the market. I'm leading, even if it's just a completion metric, even if it's not a hardcore KPI, it is essentially the conversation that we're starting with. And so I've committed to them that every quarter I will be bringing them some new level of market intelligence. And so every quarter I'm getting creative in what that looks like, but I'm measuring myself against the ability to bring them those market insights. If that makes sense.
So I guess one of the things I think about with the chief market officer movement is I don't know if you need to go and flash it around that you are, you're not. I would, just start showing up that way to the degree you can.
Exactly. And I think it's also an opportunity to help bring up the people behind us as well, right? And to help them understand how, even if they are more on the tactical execution side, how their ability to execute and the tactics that they're driving every day bubble up to a bigger strategy is only going to set up, the next generation of marketers to be thinking differently right from the beginning. So I think we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our business, but we also owe it to the folks that are coming up behind us to really start to change that dialogue.
Time for some talking nonsense.
Okay.
What is the industry trend or buzzword that you're just oh my God, barf, please stop?
Well, I mean, digital transformation, even though I live it and breathe it every day, because I mean, speaking of insights, like I've done a lot of research on like, what is digital transformation and what do you think digital transformation is?
It's a new website.
Oh my God. I mean, you wouldn't believe the answers. So I think we need to like ditch the digital and like, if we're talking transformation, we're talking transformation. But this concept of digital transformation, you talk to some people and it's like adopting cloud technology. You talk to other folks, it's adopting AI technology. You talk to other folks, it's a new website. So I just think we need to like ditch it all together.
So it's sort of like if you have to do a transformation, you're a little bit like already hosed.
That's true. But I will say, I've been part of organizations where you didn't have a choice.
They had.
The company was in a place. I mean, I led the brand transformation at AMD in the worst of times, and look at where the organization is now. And if we didn't actually call it a transformation, we would never have rallied the troops to change the trajectory of the business. So I do think
rallying cry.
It is. But I mean, to your point, so it's interesting because I don't know if you're familiar with Zenger and Folkman, like leadership competencies, but I went through a process, I guess, this time last year to kind of look at that extraordinary leadership competencies. And all of the CMOs I know are actually exhibiting most of those key leadership qualities. And the biggest predictor of excellence is this idea of how to inspire and motivate others to high performance, which I think CMOs do really well. And then leading change. So going back to your point, this idea, like the competencies around leading change are developing strategic perspective, championing change throughout the organization, and connecting the group to the outside world. Like the CMO, the chief market officer, like that is what we do. Like, and that is a big chunk of the core competencies that are connected to excellence in leadership.
So let's talk about your career path. Management consulting, strategy. I think you would be a great CEO. I'd bet on you. Do you want to be a CEO?
Maybe. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm kind of moonlighting as an Airbnb host right now, so that's been fun. You never know what the future holds, but I do think ultimately, like, I would like to run a business. Probably not in semiconductors, but or
safety.
Yeah, but in the enterprise B2B space, I would love to.
All right, let's put her in, Coach. We're going to all get behind that. Take it away, Kim. I love it. And then no one really gets off the show without an embarrassing story or colossal mess up.
So many failures. My biggest colossal one that was the game changer for me in terms of how I think and how I work. My first job out of college, I wrote my first press release, and it was this big joint venture with Procter & Gamble for this tiny little company, and I misspelled Procter & Gamble in the press release. And almost got fired as like a 21-year-old. And
oh my God, that's horrific.
I learned how, like, from a client service perspective, like I learned how, transparency and honesty makes all the difference. And being able to circle back to my client and explain that I made a mistake. And I will tell you, the spell check is real. So ever since then, it's like the attention to detail, right? So I was so focused on the excitement of doing the work that I didn't really think about the ability to like get down to the weeds. So those moments, those embarrassing moments, right? Misspelling Procter and Gamble, for God's sake. And the list goes on and on. But that was the one where, like I learned how to, deal with tough customers, tough clients, not happy, and fix situations that I caused, and also how to make sure that I pay a little bit more attention to detail going forward. So hard lesson for a 21-year-old.
But you know what? So my mom always tells me making a mistake is not a big deal. It's how you fix it.
Exactly. exactly. And that was what I learned.
You can actually like look better if you do a good job fixing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I will say my other colossal mistake that I made as a professional is that I was one of the only women on an integration team. And I won't say what company it was, but I was the only woman there. For several weeks, I kept saying the back end system is going to fail. The back end system is going to fail. We can't figure out the integration of the systems. I was not loud enough. I did not stand my ground. I let a bunch of men walk all over me. The system failed. 48 hours later, we were not able to process any support revenue. And then I had to go back to the board and basically explain what happened, own the mistake, and go fix it with the team. And for me, learning that lesson of like, when I believe something and when I have the data to back it up, like I need to stand my truth and speak my truth instead of, letting myself get walked over by people who are louder and older and dominant in the room. And I didn't really take the stance that I needed to in that moment. I said it again, and I let them walk all over me. And at the end of the day, how do we kind of, find our voice? And so that was a big lesson for me as well.
I have one of those too. And it's like, we trust, sometimes it's your instinct. Sometimes it's just having confidence that your shit. But well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a good message for a lot of folks out there listening. Like, stand by, you got it, sisters, right?
Yeah. And I will say that an SVP of that very large organization, about a month after the whole incident in his staff meeting said, "So can we all just admit Kim was right?" And I was like, that's all I needed. Thank you.
Yeah.
We should have listened to her. And I'm like, as long as you learn a lesson from this, then I'm happy as well.
Lessons all around. Lessons all around. Well, Kim, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, paving the way as a chief market officer. I've got high hopes for you paving the way in lots of different areas for CMOs. And
let's bring up the people behind us too. That's the most important.
Yep. The whole pipeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for coming on, and look forward to catching up soon.
Thanks for having me.